What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. I am beyond thrilled. This is my second StreamYard video with a special guest in literally like a week. And these are actually some of my favorite videos to do. I prefer in person because then we can hug and be best friends and drink together, which we are. But long story short, I kind of brought this idea up to this gentleman probably a few months ago. He reminded me very gently the other day, and I said, let's do this, because I totally forgot. And it's a great little idea. And as you can see from the thumbnail, it is, should Skyfall have been Daniel Craig's last film? There's a few different ways to look at it. There's a few different ways to analyze this. So who better than analyze this, Mr. Bond himself? Ryan, welcome, my friend.
It's a pleasure to be here, Luke. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure to have you. Do you have a libation?
I do.
Good.
I've got some Bunnahabhain 12. I hope I said that correctly. Don't come for me, Scotch lovers, but a little bit of Scotch here. What do you got?
I've got a little old fashioned with bullet bourbon. So cheers to you.
Cheers.
Cheers to us most likely getting bombarded in the comments. But hey, that's why we do this.
I hope so. I mean, if we get bombarded by the comments, it means we've done our job, because
that's
I think
exactly right.
Fun topic. I've been looking.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So I wanted to do this with you because I feel like you and I think over text or over Instagram kind of discussed, and obviously I'm a huge fan of yours as a YouTuber, but as a person, you and I finally got to spend some time together, I think a couple times now. And You're the absolute man, a gentleman, a scholar. And I figured you would be the best to do this with, because the way that you approach your YouTube is you kind of go like literally analyze this, Mr. Bond. You take a very analytical deep dive into not just like Dr. No, but you'll like the villains of Dr. No, or like, you know what I mean? Something, I like to kind of go just adjacent to what's mainstream. And I feel like you kind of do the same. Can you just, for anybody who's watching who may not know about your channel, just a quick elevator pitch of what it is that you do on Analyze This, Mr. Bond?
Absolutely. So first off, thank you for the kind introduction. I can. I have no words.
My pleasure.
Analyze This, Mr. Bond is my channel where I kind of dig into the Bond adventures, cinematic and otherwise, just to kind of like peel back the layers. And the genesis of that channel was I used to have a past life as a film critic, and I had written this series about the Daniel Craig Bond movies.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so nobody read them because they were just sitting on a blog. And I was like, hey, I should put these onto YouTube, see if they take off. And people started watching it, and I felt really good about it, and I've kept going. And so I like to, pull apart the movies a little bit, find what themes are there, sometimes look at the different machinery, consider the what ifs, try to see, what is there in terms of the psychology of the character. Most of the time is like, what is driving this character in each of these adventures? So yeah, that's my channel. Check it out if you want. I'm sure Luke will link it in the comments, but
absolutely. Your videos do fantastic. Like, your views are great. And somebody pointed this out to me a while ago, and it was like this like subscriber to viewer ratio. And for a newer channel, you're crushing it. You're absolutely crushing it, which means I think honestly you've got good marketing skills, but I think people see one of your videos and thinks like, this is different than just like watching my top 10 Bond films. It's like something a little more you can sink your teeth into,
Well, thank you. I feel like I'm just picking up where, folks like you and David established before. I mean, this is just me kind of playing catch up in a lot of ways, and just trying to find my way into it the only way I know how. So
yeah, well, you're doing a great job, buddy. And like I said, perfect for this video. So before we start diving in, I want to know, where does Skyfall rank, and just within the Craig era, where does that rank amongst his 5 films for you?
Some days it's number one, some
Okay.
days it's number two, and it's always going back and
Casino Royale.
yeah, yeah.
See,
It's
you and I are the same. Yeah.
it just flips. I would say I think Casino Royale has the stronger story altogether. I think that script is better built
Hmm.
than Skyfall's script, but Skyfall has a vibe I just can't let go of. I just
Yeah.
love spending time with that movie, and so I I would say Skyfall is the one I probably like put on the most for like just good times. It
Yep.
just I just throw it on and enjoy it. So how about so you said you have the same two. Does it waver as much? The
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, and you put it, and to say it like Daniel Craig, you put it marvelously. That is exactly, and I've never really known how to say it, because you kind of feel like you have to choose, but says who? You're completely right. It is the same for me. It's um I want to say Casino Royale is a nearly perfect film, and Blonde Bond. I mean, we grew up with Pierce Brosnan, you and
yeah.
I saw Daniel Craig on the Thames, and I thought, this is the opposite of Pierce Brosnan, and I was enraged. And then when I saw Casino Royale, I thought, what just happened? Truly, like, I was like, this is like nothing I've seen before. Like, this is a masterpiece, truly. And I was like, this guy's an incredible actor. He's ripped. He's so serious about this role. It was just outrageous. But then Skyfall to me is like, it's Daniel Craig's version of old time Bond. And I know people can say that with Spectre, but I think it's just like, it's Casino Royale, but a little bit more fun, and obviously they're very different, but it's kind of like still an incredibly good movie, still very highly rated, 90 something on Rotten Tomatoes. They both are, but a little bit less serious, which is what we're used to. So I think you hit the nail on the head. It's easy to kind of flop the two.
I really think so. And the way you put it is like being classic is what I felt like when I started to watch Skyfall the first time. And I remember seeing it vividly in IMAX with the cinematography. And it's like opening up on that scene with him walking down the hall. And then you get that wonderful bit where he just like steps into the Istanbul street for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Just thinking of how like settled Daniel Craig felt in the character at that point, and just like how much more. I mean, it works in that story to a point because that's like an old man Bond story. There's kind of like that weird leap, but I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit.
Right.
With Skyfall taking that leap, but Craig feels more mature in that. He feels like a Bond who's kind of like settled into his career, whereas we had like kind of like hot-headed Bond before.
Right.
And that kind of eases into the way that he just acts as Bond throughout the entire thing. And it's so stylish. You and I are sartorial guys. We like this, the clothes and the style of Bond. And as much as I like Casino Royale, that is not my like favorite style.
Yeah.
And Skyfall was like the one. Well, I mean, Quantum of Solace looked fantastic, but like Skyfall was the one where it was like, oh, this is like a full vibe. Like this was like a really expensive blockbuster made with incredibly good taste. Mm-hmm. And so like that's one reason I just keep watching it. It's gorgeous. Everybody looks great in it. It's just like, it's just a mood.
Yeah, and of course, like, the marketing juggernaut behind it with the Olympics was just outrageous. And it's funny because my go-to sartorial recommendation is always the Sunspell Polo, because of the availability and the price and the fact that it is a screen accurate piece that you can get at any point in time and you're never breaking the bank. But yeah, I mean, the Barber jacket outfit is like, was it Esquire who voted it like top 10 in like a century or quarter century or whatever it was, however many years, like outfits in cinema. Like, it's sitting right here. I don't tell many people that this is my coat closet that I'm filming in, but hey, the audio is fantastic. This is what happens when you have a baby. You got to move around and stuff. But
as long as you have the backdrop, you're good.
People at work see this and they're like, "Wow, your office is great." I'm like, "Oh, I know. Trust me, it's got a window. But no. So the question I want to ask you is, and you are right, we will touch on the old man Bond because that does kind of create an arc and then it goes back this way. It's just weird. But when I say to you, should Skyfall have been Craig's last film? Do you look at it in the sense as in Spectre and No Time to Die don't exist? Or do you look at it in the sense of I'm taking Skyfall and moving it to the end, changing the ending of No Time to Die and just moving it to the end?
Oh, what a radically interesting question. I didn't even think of it that
Yeah.
like shuffle the order of
There's many ways, there's many ways to look at it and why. That's why I think it's so interesting because for the sake of the comments and the discussion, if that were the scenario, obviously No Time to Die has a different ending. It has that Dark Knight Rises ending or just typical Bond, whatever. But so I'm assuming you thought of you're just getting rid of Spectre and No Time to Die and giving him 3 films.
I just assumed it was the original game plan because Daniel Craig did originally intend to end his run with Skyfall. He was contracted for more movies, but he was kind of feeling at that point like I've done 3. That's a good run. It's a good thing, and then
And
it was
they're
so
good.
successful.
Yeah.
And it was so successful, he just had to keep going. Like your movie makes $1 billion box office, nobody's gonna let you leave. And
yeah,
and I just thought when you posed the question, like, okay, Daniel Craig just walks away on top. Like he has the biggest blockbuster Bond that we've had since the Roger Moore days, since The Spy Who Loved Me, Moonraker, and Craig just says, "That's it. I'm going out on top. I'm walking. See you, bye." And maybe some version of Spectre happens with a different actor, but it probably would have been very different, or whatever happens.
Mm-hmm.
But I just assumed we were talking about that way. But it's a very interesting question to think about, like what would happen if you shuffle the story around, because that actually gets into the old man Bond of it a little bit, because it's a kind of story about kind of wrapping up the Bond arc in a lot of ways, because like it's like a Bond who's like at the tail end being broken down and then like kind of finding his groove again. I don't know how well that would work, because obviously Spectre and No Time to Die would have to change a lot, but you could that almost works a little bit when you play it out that way, because you would left off with Quantum of Solace, which was like there's this sinister organization out there. So if you leap right from a version of Quantum into a version of like Bond is investigating a sinister conspiracy in Spectre, that kind of works organically, and then you could have him wrap up that arc with whatever we want to do with No Time to Die, and then you could kind of close it out with the death of Judi Dench's M and
and that's an interesting point is the Skyfall, they don't talk about Quantum. Skyfall has nothing to do with Quantum, so they introduce it and then leave it alone, and then Spectre they somewhat reintroduce it, and so you could. This is where it gets. I mean, we could sit here for hours. You could take Spectre and put it in front of Skyfall and just kick No Time to Die in the trash. You could, but then the end of Spectre is a lot more I'm not coming back than Skyfall is. But then, and Skyfall works at the end because of Old Man Bond.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just so many different ways to play with it. It's kind of, it's like a fool's errand to kind of answer this question. I hate to say
it's that question is just like a deep hole, because it will lead us down the road of like fan fictioning our version of what Spectre could have been, and that's fun. I made a video on that where I essentially fan fictioned my own version of Spectre and things like that, and I think that's a fun way to go. I think the question would really be, would that have been as satisfying a moment at the end of that arc? Because I think what was really exciting from what Skyfall brings new to the story which was pretty radical at the time. In the build up to the movie, I didn't think this was going to go very well when I heard this was what the story pitch was. But like we were going to go explore Bond's childhood in a way that the movies had never explored before. And I was like, oh, that's like
this isn't going to go well. Yeah.
Reason. And I think the best thing you can say about Skyfall is like it does that, and it really kind of pulls it off with a lot of really good taste in the way that it handles Bond returning to his ancestral home, how it lays that into the story, and how certain details are handled with like a light touch. Like we just kind of briefly see his parents' tombstones. They don't dwell on that. Like Bond just doesn't really want to be there. There's a lot of stuff about that, and I feel like that story beat feels a lot stronger coming earlier in the arc than if like you had laid on a lot of the other personal stuff that gets layered on. Let's assume like Spectre and No Time to Die have some version of what those arcs were. Like that arc feels really powerful at that moment because it was kind of like you had two stories about Bond and Vesper, and it was like, what do you kind of do next to give Daniel Craig something to chew on? And like that was actually a pretty good solution. It was like, we're not doing another broken-hearted Bond. We're doing like Bond has to confront this thing that's always been part of his story that the movies have never focused on. And I think the problem with that being in the middle of his run is like it's like a where do you go from there question. And I think Spectre and No Time to Die both have the like where do you go from there problem, and that's part of the reason they are the movies that they are. They just don't have a good answer to like, well, how do you follow up what we just did in Skyfall? But I don't know. I kind of like that sitting in the middle. It just feels right. Like you've kind of like just kind of like that moment happening, and also the Judi Dench arc happening when it does. It would feel kind of strange for, not that Judi Dench couldn't have stayed around as M for all 5 movies, but that is the one aspect I do like giving momentum in the back 2 movies, is that there's been this big transition at MI6, and I think that also made sense. I don't know if you know this, but they actually considered killing off Judi Dench in Quantum of Solace, but they cut it because it was so like rushed that they didn't really want to do that story element.
No, I didn't know that. But that doesn't surprise me because they kind of like, even in the current, even in the existing film, it's like partially plot,
Right.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting to me is obviously the way that they, and it's, like we'll focus more on Skyfall, but you got to talk about Spectre, and you got to talk about, well, more Spectre than anything. The way that they try and tie everything in Spectre together is, we could probably all agree, it's just a little ridiculous as you do that. So I know, without just from your non-verbal cues, I know that you agree. But my thing is, you make 1.1 billion on Skyfall, and then Spectre makes almost 900 million or something. So you got 2 just massive hits.
Yeah.
But what was interesting to me is in 2005, when I'm 14 or 15, and Casino Royale comes out, I don't know who Mads Mikkelsen is. I don't know who Eva Green is. I didn't know who Daniel Craig was. I obviously knew who Judi Dench was, and love her to death because she's part of the franchise and she's incredible. But Quantum of Solace comes out, and even these actors, I don't know who any of these actors are. But then you realize as you get older, these are all incredibly talented, sought-after actors. But it's not until Skyfall where you're like, okay, we've got an Oscar-winning director, Oscar-winning villain. It's all these like more mainstream people. I mean, like, Mads Mikkelsen has had how many Swedish movies that are just outrageous, incredible. But we don't. I've seen some. That's something later in life that you're kind of like, oh, this I'm actually attracted to. Whereas a 14-year-old, you're like, I don't give a shit. But same with the actors in Quantum of Solace, you think the same thing. But then when Javier Bardem is cast, you're like, okay, No Country for Old Men, you can go down the list, and you're like, okay, you're onto something pretty spectacular here. I mean, and don't get me wrong, Bond has been very good with casting very talented people for a very long time. But I think of something like Tomorrow Never Dies when Anthony Hopkins says no, to Skyfall Day, I think no actor would say no, you know? So after Skyfall, how do you not make another one with that director and that actor, because it was so incredibly successful? And you just did a video on Mission Impossible, but those are movies that get high 90s on Rotten Tomatoes and make incredible amounts of money.
Yeah.
And Bond did that. So how do you not throw a bunch of money at Daniel Craig, throw a bunch of money at casting Christoph Waltz and the rest of the crew, Ray Fiennes, all these different people? You're like, now we got Oscar winners, we got all these incredible actors, all these mega stars. This is just going to be a hit. But then the script isn't incredible. But it's still, and I always use Rotten Tomatoes, and forgive me, I feel like it's just the easiest, but like it's still like mid 60s or something. That's considered a successful film, critically speaking. But you've just come down from 2 out of your 3 last films are like elite films.
Yeah.
So now people like you and I are like, okay, there's plot holes galore. You've completely wasted Christoph Waltz. Sam Mendes is probably like, yeah, I'm definitely done now, because this was not even remotely like Skyfall for us. And then you've got the potential of kind of like ruining previous films by like trying to tie them together, and it doesn't make any sense. So that's where, and not to say that my argument is to make Skyfall in the end, because you and I both said that we would kind of announce at the end if we think it should or should not be. But
Sure.
when you look at those types of things, do you feel like even if you wanted it to be the last film, there's no way in hell it ever could have or even should have been?
At the time, I sure as hell didn't want it to be the last Daniel Craig Bond
Same
film.
here.
I walked out of Skyfall being like, oh, what is the next one gonna do? And like, let's go. Like, that was my feeling. And I think that was the feeling of most of the audience at that time. Skyfall was epically huge. It was, as much as Bond had been a big fixture in my entire life, like the biggest Bond film of my lifetime to date, like unquestionably. And when I walked out of that theater, I was ready to be like, okay, I can't wait for what like more Daniel Craig Bond would be. And I mean, I think everybody was jazzed, and I'm sure even Daniel Craig and Sam Mendes were taken aback with how successful Skyfall ended up being. It was, Bond films had always been successful, but like $1 billion at the box office successful was not what Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace had done. And the level of success that they felt, and this was Sam Mendes stepping out of his wheelhouse too. Sam Mendes had never made any film on this scale before. So this was like a big, like the director of American Beauty and Revolutionary Road and Road to Perdition and all this stuff is stepping in and doing a Bond movie. It was kind of like a big thing. And yeah, you had to have a follow-up. My question for you, so first off, I want to know how you felt when Skyfall ended, because I am very curious, like what you felt about like a follow-up to Skyfall, and then what you felt when you walked out of the theater at the end of Spectre about Craig being what after that.
Okay, I thought you were gonna say No Time to Die, and I was like, you already know. I wanted to die.
Well, No Time to Die is on an island.
Yeah. Let's just we can completely just eradicate, for a Rami Malek term, we'll eradicate No Time to Die from the discussion.
Yeah.
So actually, this is a I don't want to call it a problem. But I am a slave to new films. I just love the fact that there's a new Bond film. So it's extremely difficult for me to walk out of the theater thinking like, that wasn't as good. Because, like we've said, sartorial guys, Spectre is sartorially stunning. Stunning. I have No Time to Die, by the time No Time to Die came out, I was very heavily involved in this. I mean, I got involved, but like Bond's Apartment started during COVID, and then, thinking No Time to Die was, a couple months away, and then the way so I was like, I knew all the guys, I was making video, doing all this stuff long before the film came out. So a lot of my collection is from No Time to Die sartorially, but I've got a lot of stuff from Spectre and a little bit of stuff from Skyfall and like one thing from Casino Royale. So it was like sartorially easier and easier to get. So Spectre was huge for that aspect because that to me is my favorite. I know it's between that and Quantum for a lot of people. Spectre personally for me is my favorite, but it's like it's difficult for me to walk out of the theater and step back and say, okay, was that as good as Skyfall? Am I satisfied? For me, something like No Time to Die, that was never a thing. So it was just like, oh, we finally got another Bond movie. I can go see this a bunch of times. Leia Sedu's beautiful. However you want to look, like, the locations are great. The outfits are great. You got Christoph Waltz. Like, I'm not sitting here thinking like, yeah, Christoph Waltz was not Inglourious Bastards Christoph Waltz in this film. Now I can. So to answer your question, I left there just thinking, yeah, another Bond movie. And I didn't hate it. I probably liked it at the time. It takes time for me to really analyze a film, but not so much anymore. That's what's kind of funny. No Time to Die has changed that for me completely. Like, it really has.
You landed on that one pretty clear.
Oh yeah. Well, but now I can do it with any film. It's just kind of like you wear blinders because it's your favorite character, but then you find out even your favorite character isn't immune to letting you down. You know what I mean? So now it's like any film I watch, I look at it a little differently.
I was like that with to go back in time a little bit. So Die Another Day came out when I was in high school, and I was so excited about it. This was like in the early internet days where I like had the trailers downloaded on my big PC and was like watching them endlessly. And I saw that movie in theaters like 4 or 5 times, trying to convince myself that I loved it more than I did. Like, I walked out of it opening night, and like I could feel somewhere inside me that I was like, you didn't really love that movie. But I was like, nah, that movie was fun. And then I came back to see it, and I understand that entirely. But one question to follow up on that then. So when the story started to come around that Daniel Craig might not come back after Spectre, and like folks like Tom Hiddleston might become Bond, how did you feel about that conversation? Were you like, oh, I really want Daniel Craig to do one more, or this guy?
Yeah, I mean, and David and I, the Bond experience for people watching, he and I had this conversation the other day. Pierce Brosnan is my Bond, but Daniel Craig's my favorite. It's very weird to say, but it's true. Because it's like contradicting. It's similar to like Casino Royale versus Skyfall. It's like I have found a cheat code on how I can answer that question. So yeah, I have like when he went on Colbert and announced he was coming back, I can go and watch that video right now and still get chills. I swear to God. And I watch it all the time because he was incredible to me. He was just unbelievably good. And I don't know. I felt like, and this goes exactly, it's an excellent question you asked because it goes exactly with the theme. I would have been very disappointed if Skyfall was his last one, just simply because he was so good. So you're thinking after Spectre, like, do another one. Spectre made a ton of money. You had all these megastars. Critically, it did okay. Like, it wasn't a flop. Like, why not do another one? They're giving you 30 million or whatever. Like, do another one. And obviously, you and I doing what we do, we have a little bit more of an idea of what it's like for him to be a producer too. And it's years of work rather than just showing up to set and acting and leaving. And of course, a film like that, there's injuries, broken arms, missing fingertips, kneecaps, whatever it is he had. But you're just like, why wouldn't you? It's like I feel like they still had the steam to kind of work with whoever they wanted to work with for No Time to Die. And they kind of did. I mean, they got Rami Malek, who just won an Oscar. So, and side note, I never saw Tom Hiddleston as James Bond. I just didn't think you can go from Craig to Hiddleston. I just thought they were too different. So any of that, and Tom Hardy and whoever else, it was just like, I don't know. But I guess it would have been easier to be at peace with it if it was, I'm doing one more and then I'm done. And then he did Spectre. There was not much discussion of yay or nay as Spectre was being filmed. And then as it came out, there was the rather slash my wrists, the whole nine. So for No Time to Die, I was like, you knew it was his last one. Stop asking the question. That's it.
I hear you. I was more open, I think, to the idea of someone like Tom Hiddleston being Bond just for the variety of it, because I felt like what had happened with Spectre, and we're getting a little bit off the beaten path here with talking about Spectre, but I think it's relevant to this broader.
Oh, it all ties. Yeah, it absolutely ties.
I felt like the problem with Spectre was like, I really liked Daniel Craig as Bond, and I've always really liked his interpretation of Bond. Brosnan was the one I grew up with. Craig was the one who was like really excited me, and what his movies were doing really excited me. Spectre kind of backed them into a corner in a way that I was like, well, whatever you do for the follow-up is going to have to start in this kind of like weird place. You've kind of like, no matter what Daniel Craig's follow-up to Spectre, regardless of whether it had been No Time to Die, was always going to have some weird baggage to deal with, given how Spectre kind of ended. I mean, you kind of guess could have done that, and that was my only thought about it, was like, if Craig comes back to do one more, like, they better have like a good idea for what that is. And they had an idea, it turns out, but it was a controversial one. But I was game either way, and I was very excited when Daniel Craig announced he was going to come back, because I think you and I probably feel that as much as I love that movie sartorially and like enjoys. I've reconciled myself to Spectre in a lot of ways years since, but like
me too.
It would have been kind of a disappointing ending to the Craig run if that was the grand finale. Like, it just wasn't. It didn't feel like in the build-up to it they were presenting it as the big finale, and as the movie plays out, it doesn't really feel like it's the final culmination. It feels like trying to be that. Like, oh look, I'm the author of all your pain, but like, you don't really like. None of that is landing. And
it's like a very poor version of a finale. Like, it could be, but it's really not written as it. But if it needed to be, it can be.
Right. Exactly. And that was the one reason I was like, I really hope Craig comes back for a fifth, is because it just like, there just needs to be a better end cap for what this is. In the same way that, and I know people have mixed feelings about this movie too, like when Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out, I was like, I hope Harrison Ford does one more, because like Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is such a weird note to leave that character on. We should just at least have one more thing to give him another chance for this beloved character that I love so much. I want to see a better exit. I wanted to see a better exit for Daniel Craig's Bond. And so I guess that takes us back to Skyfall in an interesting way, because the question then becomes like, if he walks out after Skyfall and he walks out on top, like,
see, you and I we went to the exact same place. So I had, as you were talking, I had two follow-up questions. So now Once again, No Time to Die does not exist. And you've got Skyfall and Spectre that have somewhat, well, Skyfall's got a very, let's get back to work ending. Spectre has a riding off into the sunset ending, both of which could be, Spectre, he's just going on vacation. He's just going to have a little fun with Leia Seydoux, whatever. And Skyfall is very like, I'm a badass. Let's get back to work. Yes, the way that they look should have been flip flopped. But my first question to you is, with everything you just said, if someone were to say to you, okay, Spectre's his last film, would you prefer Spectre or Skyfall? To exactly how they are, no changes, for the sake of time and losing everybody under the sun watching, exactly how they are. Would you say, and you just said, he needs to come back. Me and you are the same. Come back, come back. He comes back, does Spectre. And you said, you know what? Skyfall had a better ending to where I would have been okay if he left after Skyfall, because not super thrilled with Spectre. I love that you knew you were on mute too. I was like, I feel like I might have to tell, and you were just like,
no, I'm just pausing because like I know we've posed this question. You posed this question in an Instagram message to me a long time, and I should have a firm emotional answer to the question that you're saying, and I am. That feels like such a hard question to me.
Well, this is the thing. I agree with you completely. Spectre would have been a very anticlimactic ending to an actor's tenure, let alone Daniel Craig's tenure. And personally, for me, Skyfall is like that, looks aside, old man Bond aside, all that. Like, you've casted a new M, you've got Moneypenny, you've got Q. Like, I'm ready to get back to work. Then you could bring in a new actor, but you would obviously have to keep that M, that Q, that money, whatever. But Spectre's just kind of like underwhelming for something like that. Like, it really is like we wrote this knowing he may not come back, but I'm going to throw as much money at him as possible to make sure he does. So it's like, if for some reason we're caught in this pinch where Daniel Craig says, I'm sticking to my guns, I'm going to make Knives Out, suck it, thanks for the memories. We did kind of lay the groundwork, but not very well. That's where, for me, it's like, at least Skyfall was just a freaking tour de force, fantastic film. And it is in my opinion, of all of them, the ultimate high note to end on. Because you can't end on Casino Royale, obviously.
Yeah, if Casino Royale had been a one and done, what a weird experience. But I have to say that in my mind, if I like separate who I am as a Bond fan, who just like wants Bond movies in general, regardless of this, if I have to say like in terms of legacy, what it would have meant for Daniel Craig if he walked away after Skyfall, it makes those three movies much stronger. It's like this guy left his mark and like left people wanting more, and people. Yeah. But as a Bond fan, I don't necessarily want to be left wanting more. If we like view this as like a 4-course meal, right? So like we've gotten through like the entree that is Skyfall. I still want that dessert. I want that dessert. I want to be sitting there at dessert with a coffee or another drink and just chatting with my friends and kind of like digesting what has come before. And I as underwhelming as it is, it's like a bad dessert after a great meal, and that's always underwhelming. I kind of just want the bad dessert.
Me too.
That is Spectre, because because it kind of helps Skyfall settle a little bit, maybe. Yeah. I'm a big Dalton guy. Not everybody's a big Dalton guy.
I love Dalton. I've just kind of discovered Dalton, and I love, like, Living Daylights is incredible. I don't even hate License to Kill, and I love the fact that you can go to Florida and see these locations.
It's phenomenal. But there's like this weird question mark over Dalton because he left his mark with 2 movies. Like we got a very clear perspective of who his Bond was, but it's like you didn't really get like that afterglow where you kind of just got to like enjoy it. And I feel like Spectre is kind of that. It's kind of like it's a little bit underwhelming, but it's at least like I felt like full at the end of that. Like I've been fully satiated. I had kind of like gotten what I wanted. And even in retrospect, with Craig's legacy, I feel like Skyfall still stands tall. I think if I was Craig, I think I have no idea what Daniel Craig personally thinks about his tenure as Bond. But
Probably doesn't love it.
I do wonder if he sits up at night and is like sometimes like, yeah, I just should have said goodbye after Skyfall and have gone out on like the highest of highs.
See, this is the thing. As a huge Daniel Craig fan, and admittedly, especially in conversations with other, Joe Darlington, David Zaritsky, the whole squad, not a fan of the way Daniel Craig acts towards James Bond, post James Bond. And he's got a little bit of a disdain. But then you kind of can't necessarily, I mean, first of all, you're a mega A-lister and a multi-millionaire because of it. So calm your shit. However, as an actor, you're kind of like, I guess I get it. I guess because he could have stopped even after Spectre and probably been able to sail into the sunset, no problem. But I am the same. Like I said, I'm a slave to new films. And you look at something like A View to a Kill, and Roger Moore is, as us Bond fans say, long in the tooth. And yet I don't sit there bitching about it. It doesn't bother me that he's old. It doesn't bother me because he made another movie. He did all the tropes. You had some good actors in there. It doesn't. It's still just a fun Bond movie, And he kind of went out on his own way and was like, yeah, we can be done, whatever. And it's like they're kind of like, no, we gotta continue to pump. I mean, Barbara Broccoli, she loved Daniel Craig, and I think that was a double-edged sword. I think it kind of was potentially a detriment at times to getting him to do more movies, even if he didn't want to. And,
I think they both respected each other a lot. And I think it was a partnership where I think it probably was, if we're going to talk about Barbara Broccoli's experience a little bit, I think it was probably very daunting to think of like, oh, we might have lost Craig after Spectre. What do we do now? And we know like in 2015, that's when like the first Christopher Nolan conversation happened. And we understand why, because it was like, oh, okay, well, you just kind of wrapped up with Spectre. You don't know where things are going. Cary Fukunaga was brought in at that point to do a pitch, and he pitched a whole new like reboot at that point and like what he would do and all that. That's why he got selected later on, because he'd come in and done that. So like Eon Productions was thinking like Craig might not be coming back and we need to figure something out. And that was probably rough, especially when I know Daniel Craig's a smart guy. He knew Spectre wasn't the best movie he could have made. Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson are smart people. They looked back at Spectre and they were like, this is not the way we feel good about leaving what we're doing here. And so I understand why everybody came back together. And I'm happy that we, got what we got in a lot of ways. And I don't know. I would be devastated in many ways personally if Craig had walked after Skyfall. I think I would still to this day be like, well, what about that 4th Craig movie would have gotten? Even if they had brought in my favorite candidate like Michael Fassbender to be Bond in the next movie,
Yeah.
like I would always be thinking about, well, what if we had gotten a fourth Craig?
Yeah. So you're in that GoldenEye kind of realm where GoldenEye arguably Pierce's best, and yet you can still kind of sit there and think, well, what if Dalton did it? So you're saying even if, like for me, my ideal is Theo James. So if they brought in Theo James, and Theo James was not even doing Spectre, just all new, maybe it's not Purvis and Wade, who knows? Would you still? I mean, I think I may have been sitting there thinking, you know, and I don't know. I mean, see, this is something else. Like Theo James wasn't today's Theo James in 2012. All these different things. But say it's today. Craig's tenure was shifted 10 years, and his last film was last year, and it was Skyfall. I probably would think like, damn, like he's, yeah, they old man Bond, but like old man Bond can beat the shit out of anybody I know. Like, like he could still do another one or two, just make them a little quicker. And it's I think I agree with you on that. I agree that I definitely would have felt robbed. But I think the question is, now that we've seen what the other two products are would you look at it differently? Or am I just kind of going to uncharted territory by even bringing up No Time to crap
Well,
again?
well, I like No Time to Die, so you and I disagree a little
See,
bit
well,
on that.
that's the thing. I don't hate it either. I don't hate it either. I just hate the ending. And I hate the
Yeah,
ending because it's just that is not how you're supposed to leave a movie theater, especially a Bond movie. Like this isn't Schindler's List. Like, you know what I mean? Like you're not supposed to go home and reflect. You know what I mean? Like this is like this is supposed to be an escapism movie where, this isn't based on a true story. This is not telling like a terrible tragedy. This is like everyone's fresh out of COVID, and like this was what they decided on. Like it's like it'll never not blow my mind, but I
I
I do like a good chunk of No Time to Die.
I I don't want to dwell on this, but I do agree with the criticism that No Time to Die leans into that death in a way that is like really rough. I think there was a
Mhm.
way to kill James Bond kind of in the same way that they killed John Wick in John Wick Chapter 4 that didn't like leave you leaving the theater feeling like you were just like seated with existential like weight and
Yeah,
sorrow and depression in a way that could have been still done. But I'm gonna say I still, if you're finally asking me the point where I put my cards on the table about where I am emotionally standing on this,
if
I
you're
will
ready.
I will take the entire Craig era as it stands. I do not want Craig to have left after Skyfall. If it's just up to me and I'm allowed to be
Okay.
selfish about it, that is where I stand. I want to take the like I think Spectre and No Time to Die are both like glass half full, glass half empty movies in their
Mhm.
own way. And I'm going to take the half full of both of those movies. I want the Day of the Dead sequence in Spectre. I want the Cuba sequence in No Time to Die. I want
Yeah.
these pieces and I want them to exist and I don't want them to just be banished from history just so that Skyfall can seem even better in retrospect because I do think like because I also think like Skyfall would leave the era feeling unfinished. I don't think three
Mhm.
films is enough for the
No,
Craig,
not for him. Not for him.
not for him.
No. And this is what's funny is with Dalton, he is somebody I didn't give a chance to for a long time. I don't know why. I
Mhm.
used to watch the Craig and Roger Moore films like around Christmas time every year, or Spike TV used to have the marathons. I never really cared to get into On Her Majesty's Secret Service. It was almost like unless you did multiple films, I don't care. It was weird. But then once I kind of dove into the Dalton stuff, like I actually feel like I might have felt that way in the late 80s. Like, what are we doing here? Like, the guy's good. He's doing a good job. So yeah, I agree with that. And then, the weird thing about No Time to Die is as much as I hate the ending, I was lucky enough to go to like a press event for it and kind of see it in that fashion. Of course, this light's gonna die. Okay, no, we're good. And it was like press in one theater and some other press in a different theater. So there's only like 12 people, because it's Michigan, right? It's not LA. But they had two theaters, so I think they had maybe like a little bit more high profile people in one, and then kind of like bloggers or people like me or whatever in the other one. And you're just like in this weird dark theater, and you're not sitting next to anybody. Like, I'm not with my wife, I'm not with a friend, and a lot of these people have notepads and they're taking notes and writing. But then when the ending came, everybody stopped writing and just watched. And then I'm sitting there like full on crying, and not like even making a face. It's just like kind of coming out. And you're just like, this is like Leia Sadu, and that's both of them are outstanding. But you're like, but this isn't James Bond. But it's hard to like differentiate, because you're like, I'm watching two incredibly good actors just act, and it is kind of different from a Bond film. But then you leave and you just don't like. I felt like I had gotten broken up with, truly. Like, I came home and cried and my wife was like, what is wrong with you? I was just like, I can't explain it. It's just not the way I would ever expect to feel after that moment,
Yeah, I think I walked out of the theater and I was like, that was a gut punch. Like
Yeah.
it was, and I knew going in that Bond was going to die, and even knowing going in, like it was still like, oh man, they really like cranked the volume up on that, like,
The death. Yeah.
and I kind of want to say, like, I don't know how fandom will feel about that in 10 years, like 10 years of Amazon, how we'll look back on No Time to Die. But like, it was, I have always said this about No Time to Die and the end of the Craig era. Like, I'm just kind of like, it's not a perfect movie. It doesn't really work in a lot of ways, but like, I'm kind of glad that Craig at least went out with like a bigger swing than Spectre, because like I felt like Spectre pulled its punches a little bit, and I'm like, at the very least, you can say like, it wasn't like, as much as we talked about it, it's not an A View to a Kill. It's not a Diamonds Are Forever. It's like it was like something where people came together and they were doing something. There was like a something there, and I think that's really kind of interesting, especially now that Eon Productions is like done with Bond. Like, that's like
it's got a whole new meaning.
Yeah, like it's kind of like, it kind of adds a level of historical resonance to that is kind of I'm going to be curious to go back and watch it after after the first Amazon MGM Bond movie comes out, like going back to watch No Time to Die and seeing how it feels, like whether it really feels like the encapsulation of this era, or whether I'm so like excited about where Amazon is going that like it seems even more flimsy in retrospect. I don't know how I feel about it.
You're like over it a little more.
Right. But I'm glad it exists, and I'm glad Spectre exists too, even with all of its like weirdness. I'm glad, like, it's the sartorial moments alone in Spectre
are good enough.
Are good enough. Like that movie as a Daniel Craig like lookbook, if you just like just take out like all the outfits, that's I'm kind of with you. Matt Spazer will come in and beat us.
He's a big quantum guy. He's a big quantum guy.
And I agree that Quantum has the best suits, but like if you're not caring about the suits and you're caring about the rest of the outfits, Spectre is gangbusters. Even some of the
Mr. White outfit to me is unbeatable. I saw that, I was like, I need this whole outfit. And this is the thing too, and we mentioned this earlier, and this is kind of my final thought is, you made a really good point with Spectre being a very lackluster grand finale. They didn't really go lackluster in No Time to Die. You got to give him that. Final Ascent was just a gut-wrenching score. The acting was brilliant. The writing was actually very, very good. And you've got two just powerhouse actors that you truly feel were in love with each other. And I will, reveal my kind of answer is I agree with you. I'm just glad that there's 5 Craig films, regardless of how those 2 post Skyfall films turned out.
I'm glad we're agreed on that. And it occurs to me now that I think there's something about being a long-term Bond fan that is also just about like struggling with movies that are imperfect. There are a lot of Bond movies that are not, objectively speaking, very good movies. And I think we just have to be honest as fandom about that there are just like a lot of Bond movies that are kind of mixed bags.
Sure.
But there's something kind of like lovely about returning to those movies over and over again and learning to find what you like about that. Like, what do I love in A View to a Kill versus like the stuff that I don't love in A View to a Kill? What do I really love in License to Kill versus the stuff that I don't really love in License to Kill?
Yeah.
Like, there are a lot of those movies in this series, and No Time to Die is that in its own like extreme way. And I'm just kind of like, at least it did something. And the fact that it's like so controversial just means we're going to continue to talk about it, much like we continue to talk about all these other movies as long as we have. In many ways, like Goldfinger is the most boring movie for Bond fans to talk about because we all agree that Goldfinger at the very least is pretty good, right? Like you and I could not have this video conversation about Goldfinger.
No, you're completely right. Or really, From Russia with Love or Thunderball or Dr. No, really any of them. Yeah, you're completely right.
What did you just say? By the way, they're great. Rosa Klebb, great villain. Okay, Carol May, great. Okay, move on.
Right.
Like, in some ways, what keeps the fan community conversation alive is like these movies that we kind of have
pick apart.
And like On Her Majesty's Secret Service was that movie until very like relatively recently. Like people didn't love that movie 30 years ago. And it's now become like universally accepted, but it's taken a long time for On Her Majesty's Secret Service to kind of creep into the good graces. I didn't love it when I first saw it. I remember when I first saw it, I was like, what is this movie? I didn't like it at all. So I think that's also part of it. I'm just glad that we have more Craig to talk about. Might be a way for me to kind of like summarize that thought is like more movies means more Daniel Craig to talk about. And I'm glad we have that.
Me too. I'm not even going to touch it. I'm going to end it right at that. You're the absolute best for doing this with me, buddy. I hope everybody enjoyed. Ryan, perfectly analyzed opinion. So you and I both agree 5 movies, the 5 that we have, we'll keep them. Not changing anything.
Not changing it.
Thank you guys for watching. Thank you, Ryan, so much for doing this. And we will see you guys on the next one.